So, hi everyone. Welcome back to another episode of A Little Jaded. I'm joined with my co-host Joanna, and we will be discussing a very interesting and relevant topic, something that we hold very near and dear to our hearts, and that is the idea of destigmatizing fangirls, not just professionally, but in everyday life. So, Joanna, take it away.
Yeah, I'm excited. We've been kind of tossing around the idea of talking about this for a while, and I think there's a lot of different conversations revolving like specific celebrities and like the idea of like fangirls and like the connection, the fan to artist connection, and there's a lot that we're going to go into, and we're constantly talking about, the fangirls music industry pipeline and how sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to feel like you have credibility as a fangirl, because of, like Kelly said, like the negative stigma around fangirls and what people believe a fangirl to be. And I think that there's a lot of different levels, but we're going to go into a lot of different topics today and hopefully give everyone a little bit more background onto the mentality of fangirls and the good sides, the bad sides, everything. So I guess let's go into, I feel like there's like so many major fandoms that everyone really thinks about when they think of like the extreme examples of fangirls, like stemming all the way back to like Beatlemania with the Beatles, of course.
Mhm.
I feel like this was one of the first really big moments where the world was experiencing a fandom and was experiencing fangirls and like that hysteria revolving around it. And it was such a moment because obviously the Beatles, they were such a massive and like amazing group, but it really was like a turning point, I think, for fandom because after the Beatles, then came Elvis. And we all know like that was a really insane time as well. And then more modern time examples is, of course, One Direction and Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift. Like there's so many different examples. And then also like fandom doesn't necessarily have to revolve like within the music industry, but then there's also TV shows like Doctor Who and video games. And there's so many different things. There's so many different things, so many different fandoms, of course, sports as well, like fandoms within like, supporting different teams. And I think there's just like this, like, as we said, there's a really negative idea of like what a fangirl really is. People like to kind of jump to this very extreme example of what a fangirl is. And again, it's like the screaming, the crying, and I mean, as a fangirl and you being a fangirl as well, like it can be difficult when you feel like there's this feeling of shame around being a fangirl because people automatically think like, oh, you're a stalker, oh, you're crazy, oh, you need to tone it down a notch.
Yeah, and also just to touch on one point, I feel like the comparison between Elvis and the Beatles, I think Elvis was a lot more domestic, whereas the Beatles, it was such a great like international sensation where it was like completely different to any type of domestic fame, like North America, for example, or being specifically tied to the UK or Europe or whatever. Seeing that whole like scale was such a big thing, and then it created the idea of like fans throughout the next few decades across the world, especially with the progression of television and just completely different types of communication overall. Like radio was a lot more prevalent. So a lot of artists started getting more popular at greater scales. And then that also led to bigger ideas of fandom. And to your point again, too, the idea that everyone paints fangirls as these crazy, hysteric people who can't control their emotions and um, lose it over someone they don't necessarily know. We're kind of gonna touch on that in the sense that like we understand that that stems from the media. It stems from portrayals of fangirls in these insane hyperbolic states where like we see like fangirls in TV shows, for example, or in movies where they're ecstatic to a point of like fainting, for example, or stalking people, going into people's dressing rooms for these fictionalized celebrities. I think of In Hannah Montana, for example, in the first episode, Lily and Oliver, they sneak into Hannah's dressing room and they're like trying to find a bunch of different things about about her that they could steal, like her toilet paper or something. I don't remember. And there's also that episode of The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, I think, where Jesse McCartney was there.
Yes.
And then,
Like this was I mean, it was a huge moment, obviously, like for like fans, like seeing this happen, like that crossover of like having like a major celebrity on a TV show, and then seeing the way that London and Maddie, the characters, were portrayed. Like they, again, super extreme example of them literally getting dressed up in like a costume and pretending
Mhm.
to be somebody else that they could sneak into his dress rehearsal and they could sneak into his hotel room and like smell his clothes. Like it's such an extreme example of a fangirl. And growing up, watching that, people growing up very young, very impressionable, everyone in general, you see that, you see it on TV, you automatically assume, oh, this is the case for everybody. And
Yeah.
this is how all fangirls are. And it's so dangerous the
Hmm.
way that, television portrays these people. And I think this is an example again of like the extreme idea of a fangirl and the idea, well, this ties into another topic that we want to talk about, which is the idea of parasocial relationships.
Yeah.
Because in the episode, I feel like London says something along the lines of like, yeah, like I'm gonna marry him. Like he and like same thing with Oliver in that episode of Hannah Montana, like, I'm gonna marry you, like I love you, like it's this extreme idea of like, I am such a fan of you. I love you so much that I want a relationship with you, or like envision this future with
Mhm.
you. When in reality, you don't know them. You don't.
Right.
And like they're just a normal person who happens to be a singer, or they happen to be an actor or whatever. And I know, I mean, Kelly, like the reason that we wanted to talk about this is because Kelly did like a whole report on the idea of like parasocial relationships and like the relation to fandom and things like that. I did like a similar kind of report when I was in school also about the negative stigma on fangirls and things. And so that's why we kind of want to talk about it. But you have knowledge on like parasocial relationships and like what that is. So if you wanted to kind of jump into that.
Yeah, so putting my psychology degree to use, first I want to start off by saying that like the reason why it's so important to talk about where these things come from is because a lot of people, like you said, form these stereotypes and expectations of people if they are so animated on television or in the media. And that leads to further prejudice and whatnot. Social Psychology 101.
Mhm.
And then we lead into the idea of parasocial relationships, which, if you don't know, there's been like very little actual research done on parasocial relationships, especially in a positive light. A lot of it is geared towards negative connotations, but generally speaking, parasocial relationships are occur when an infatuation with a celebrity becomes a source of emotional connection for someone. So it's an individual projection of a one-sided infatuation with another person who is unaware of their existence. So that's the clinical term. Generally speaking, it's the idea that if I were to be a fan of a celebrity, I create this infatuation in my head. They don't know who I am. I get over invested in this relationship. And then it can lead to some unhealthy or maladaptive types of associations or emotional bonds with these unattainable people. The reason why it's called parasocial is because para means um, adjacent to, or it's not necessarily related. It's on the side, if you will. So, yeah. So the idea of parasocial relationships are seen in a negative light because of that one-sidedness, because of that infatuation, because people pathologize that in the sense that it can lead to negative outcomes when people take it too far or who can't differentiate reality from this made up idea in their brain, right? So I think of, for example, a very, again, hyperbolic, fictionalized idea of if anyone's seen the show You, spoilers ahead technically, but it's not really that relevant. There was one character who was famous in like the fourth season. I don't remember their names, but they had like a stalkerish fan who kidnaps them and then essentially tries to kill them because they're so overwhelmed with how much they love them and they think that they're saving them. And we see that a lot in like a bunch of different types of um like not even just because of celebrity, but because of other things like religion and other political things. So it's one thing to say that like just because we're talking about it in the lens of fangirls doesn't mean it's not applicable to anything else. You can definitely see that with the way that certain people are associated with certain politicians or sports teams or fictional characters to great extents. And that's a conversation for another day. We're gearing this more towards fangirls who are more so related to music or anything in that realm, really.
Well, on the topic of like the idea of like taking it too far, it's like
Hmm.
I think parasocial relationships, I mean, I think it definitely ties into the idea of, escapism. And that's something that we wanted to talk about too. How at the end of the day, like everyone loves to daydream and like, you
Hmm.
daydream about people in your own life. You daydream about like experiences that you hope to have or people that you love or your friends and things that you want to happen. But then when it comes to, you know, these people that you don't actually know, you start to again, envision them in your mind as this person that you want them to be or this person that you believe them to be. And so something that I always bring up is like how to a certain extent like it can get very dangerous where you believe this person to be a specific way. It's like the idea like don't meet your idols because in your
Hmm.
head you build them up to be this specific person when in reality you don't know who they are behind closed doors.
Yeah.
You don't know in actuality like what their personality is like. You like to believe that you know who they are, but then you can kind of come to a brutal awakening when you experience like, oh, they are actually not this person, and that can kind of cause this like psychological like war within yourself because you're just like, whoa, like you're not XYZ. And it's just like it can be really dangerous to create these ideas in your head. And that kind of goes into like the reality of like real life experiences that have happened, that are examples of like again people taking it too far, like Selena Quintanilla, like really major example. If anybody doesn't know about that, like we don't need to go into too many like we don't need to go into like the gruesome topic or like the gruesome details about everything. Christina Grimmie, which I saw just based off of like Kelly's notes, I didn't even know about that, like the details behind that, of like
Hmm.
how she like unfortunately passed away. And it's again, it's like those really extreme cases of people taking this infatuation and these parasocial relationships to like a really unhealthy level. And I think that's again these major examples that are portrayed in the media that can just paint fangirls or fans as a whole. It paints them in a really negative way.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, those really insane examples, like we can't take away for the fact that those are like really serious situations. But there are so many positives in, you know, just loving something so much and finding so much comfort in something, and like the idea of escapism. And this is something like Kelly and I were talking about before too. Like so many artists, YouTubers, creators, actors, like so many of them, the reason that they do what they do is because they want to create something that can take away from whatever is going on in their fans' lives. If they're going something in their personal life that they just need to escape from, they don't want to focus on, they can listen to this album or they can watch this movie or something, and it makes their experience just a little bit easier. And I think that that's something that like the media doesn't really touch on, is like how much like these pieces of media and these people like they do make such a positive impact on us. And like that's why we choose to like devote so much time to them, and why we support them, and why we go to the shows, and why we do all of these things. um and the idea of like community building and relationship building. Like that's something that like we're always harping on is like building those relationships with people. Like so many of my best friends I've made through fandoms and through just like loving similar things, loving similar artists. And so many of them, like outside of that, are like friends that I'm going to have forever.
Hmm.
And even like within the music industry, like so many people who find comfort in, meeting other fangirls and then seeing like, oh, like you want to work in the music industry too, like so do I. And then having that like, that support system, like it's so underrated. Like there's not enough like light shed on that aspect of fandom and escapism and things like I don't know. I'm kind of just going on a tangent.
Yeah, I mean, from my own experiences alone, I can definitely attest to like the idea of creating community or feeling part of something when you have a shared interest. And that could be anything. Obviously, it becomes a little more murky when it's like a real person, like a celebrity. If it's like a fictional TV show or something, it's less scary to talk about. But there is the idea of like, it's not just about the artist or it's not just about the piece of media, but it's actually about the community that comes from it. Like, for example, I think of like me being a huge Harry Styles fan back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean like a couple years ago, um, where I was meeting so many people who have the same interests as me. I've made so many close friends now, even at my own school, like at my own university, because we have the same interest in music or we have the same infatuation with an artist and we became friends because we saw each other's merch, for example, from an artist. And it's like it's not necessarily the idea that you are so enthralled with a person, but rather what that person does for creating that sense of community. And I think that also is a testament to the type of artists that we're talking about, right? Because there is also that idea that I wouldn't consider it entirely one-sided because there is that artist-fan relationship, right? I think of like certain artists who create such a strong bond with their fans on social media, especially when they're a lot newer on the scene. It's something that they kind of have to do to advance in their career as well. But it's also something that's genuine in that when there are less fans, you feel more special as a fan, but you also have that tighter connection as an artist. And when you become a lot bigger, your fandom is so much bigger that fans feel like they are in a sea of people, but at the same time, they still feel that connection. Whereas some artists detach themselves from that. And that's also where it could get problematic because people have those expectations. Why aren't you as committed to your fandom as you once were, for example? And again, I think of some of the biggest names right now, who once were so connected to their fans. And I think of Taylor Swift, for example, who would literally hop into people's like fans' Instagram lives to just chat with them, or would respond to anyone on Tumblr. And she was so connected to her fans. And then when she took a very massive social media break, everyone's like, where is she and why isn't she here? There's this expectation that people form that they need to be connected to this artist in a way that is personal, and not necessarily professional. And that's where we're kind of like on the fence of talking about because you have to toe the line. You have to point out where the boundaries are and what is extreme and what isn't, and what is relevant to what one artist but not to the other, and what is seen as too much and versus not enough, right? There's a lot to be said about fandoms and the way that the artist-fan relationship is important and also relevant to, again, the relationship, but also career progression. And it's something that when we're thinking about strategizing it in like a professional setting, for example, we also have to think about the emotional connection that happens between these people and the consequences of that as well. Like Joanna said, there are some extremes to that inflated type of, I guess, like sensibility to it, or there is like not enough of it where people keep begging for more, even though it's kind of like that thing where it's like do artists, like artists don't necessarily owe you that. When we don't establish those actual boundaries that's where I think it can get problematic in the sense that no one knows where what is too much and what is not, what is appropriate and what isn't.
I think it's such a like tricky topic, like talking about like drawing that line, the connection between the fan and the artist. It's very different for each artist. And like, um, creators, YouTubers, I hear this all the time, and different artists, like, they approach that fan to artist connection in a different way because in a way they do feel like they're kind of indebted to their fans. Like the fans, at the end of the day, we always say this, like fangirls, fans in general, really are the backbone of the music industry. Like they are the ones who are streaming the music. They're the ones who are buying the physical albums. They're the ones who are buying the merch, going to the shows. Like they really are the reason why these artists are where they are. And there are, there's so many artists who they speak on that and they're like, yeah, of course, like I feel like I'm indebted to my fans. Like I'm never going to say no to a picture, but that's their own experience and that's their own belief and what they want to believe. But then there's other artists, like the most popular example right now is Chapel Roan, who obviously has had this massive year. And it's something that doesn't happen to a lot of people. Like she really went from being not nobody, but being like a really small artist where she could
Mhm.
probably go out in public and she could, she would be fine. Now, if she goes out in public, everyone's like, "Oh my God, it's Chaperone, it's Chaperone, it's Chaperone," and she felt this massive shift where all of a sudden she couldn't go to the grocery store anymore. All of a sudden she couldn't go to the gym. She couldn't go get a coffee without getting mobbed. And she made a statement online. I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you probably saw it, but if you didn't, she basically made a statement saying like she doesn't want that attention. She doesn't want people to feel like they are entitled to her attention. They are entitled to her to say yes to a photo or entitled to her to say hi to her out in public because she doesn't know them. To her, the way that she always explains it is like, you are a stranger coming up to me and talking to me, and I don't know who you are. It makes me feel unsafe. It makes me feel like, whoa, like, it's overwhelming. Like, I don't want that attention. And it got a lot of mixed responses, I feel, because again, as a fan, when you feel so connected to somebody and their work, like, and you have the opportunity to say that to them, you want to take that opportunity, and you're so excited, like maybe your judgment is a little bit clouded, like you're not necessarily paying attention to the setting, um but you just like the one thing on the top of your mind is like, this person means so much to me and
Yeah.
I want them to know like how much they impacted my life or how much they are currently impacting my life. But again, parasocial relationships, you don't know them and they don't know you. So depending on the artist's comfort level, it can be a little bit tricky because they might not feel comfortable. And like we were talking about, like obviously Chapel, who said that like she doesn't want people to come up to her. You brought up Phoebe Bridgers before we started recording, and people like Scarlett Johansson, who's in the film industry, and like you can talk about that, like specifically what they said.
My thing is about this, actually, before I'll say it, is that
Yeah.
I understand it from both perspectives. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people get into this debate of like, well, I'm right and you're wrong and you're right and I'm like, it's this whole thing where people don't want to accept that two truths can be held at once. And that's my biggest problem with the internet. And
Yeah.
it's the idea that like, yes, you kind of sign up for it in the sense that like if you're a big artist, it's kind of expected that you're gonna have this celebrity, you're gonna have this fame, and it comes with
Mhm.
it. But at the same time, it's like they should be entitled to create their own boundaries. They should be entitled to, I mean by they, I mean artists. Create those boundaries is what I was trying to say, is that like they can set aside when and where or how on their terms they'll give you that photo or they'll talk to you about something. But it's also the idea of like, is it the artist's responsibility to hold on to your baggage as a fan? Yes and no, in the
Mhm.
sense that it depends on the artist. Again, I think of certain bands or certain artists where they welcome that, where people say like, oh my God, you saved my life." And for a long time, I felt like that was such a like an endearing thing for a fan to say to an artist. But I remember one artist, maybe it was Phoebe Richards, maybe it was someone else, so I'm not gonna say who specifically. That was saying like, well, I don't want to hear about this. Like it's depressing. It's too much for me to handle. Maybe it was Chaperone. It was too much for me to handle. Like it's like I again, I don't know you. I don't know who you are, and then it puts so much pressure onto me as an artist because suddenly my your life is in my hands, and it's like a really difficult thing that people have to accept, right? You have to understand that there is a time and place as well. Like we
Mhm.
were talking about before, how if someone is just like out to dinner with their family, do you really have like the right to go up to them at their table while they're feeding themselves, hey, I like you,
Right,
can I have a picture?
right.
Like, no. Um, but again, depends on the person. It also depends on the scale, because like Chapel, she like grew so quickly,
Yeah.
and she's like internationally famous. Whereas, as I was saying, like for example, like a Broadway performer who just broke out in the last like 5 years, still a smaller community. If they're stopped on the street, they're more likely than like a Chapel Roan, for example, to take a picture because they're like, oh, I forgot that I was famous. Um, Also, it's like the idea of
Mhm.
like for example, like Scarlett Johansson, what she was saying is she's like, I am big, whatever. I am not working. When I'm walking down to the gym or to the coffee shop or the grocery store, I am a human being. I'm just like doing my thing. I'm not on the clock. I'm not working. So if you come up to me, I'm gonna say no for a photo. And she got a lot of like backlash for that, which I find is kind of crazy because it's just her creating her boundaries and she's entitled to that, right? And there was also the idea of Phoebe Bridgers, who
Yeah.
was stating that I think it was that she was going to her dad's funeral or her dad's wake, and people created this idea that she had a bad relationship with her father through her music and felt entitled to say like, oh, like why are you going to his funeral? Like I thought you hated him, blah blah blah. And it's like, well, you don't know this person, you don't know her actual relationship with her father. Also, it's a very vulnerable experience for a person in general.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and then she was
That's
being
insane.
stopped at the airport too, and she finally put her foot down and gained so much like hate for it because she was saying like, "Well, I don't know you, you don't know me, leave me alone, stop bullying me for having emotions and going through this or whatever." And I also remember she was like with who she was dating at the time, like Bo Burnham, and everyone's like, "Why would she be doing that? Why is she's not going to her wake if she's with his wake if she's with him?" And I'm like, you don't know these people. You don't know these people. Sorry, I'm getting so heated over this because I just like remembered everything. It started coming back to me.
It kind of goes that idea of like I know like it's like we always talk about it like that they would never do this. Why are
Right.
they doing this? Like they obviously don't feel this way or like oh my God like why like it's a crazy again it's like a psychological thing where it's just like you think that you know this person because you create this idea of them in your head and like you know as a chronically online girl myself like I see a lot of these like backstories and all of these like oh did you know about this, did you know about this person's dating history and this person's blah 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 like people just love to speculate and love to
Yeah.
draw really quick conclusions and it's something that I've seen like even like from like a smaller scale, like YouTubers and things say is like, at the end of the day, they don't know my life. They don't know what's really going on in my life. They see what I allow them to see,
Mm-hmm.
and they can
Mm-hmm.
create their own conclusions based off of what I allow them to see. But if they're, painting me to be this type of person, or they think that I do this or I don't do this, or I have this relationship with my father, like that is their own interpretation of what my life is. They don't actually know. And it can be
Mm-hmm.
really frustrating because all you want to do is like scream to the world, like, this is not true. This is really who I am. This is really like what's going on and XYZ, but like you owe them that explanation? Not really, because they I don't know. It's like I don't even
Yeah.
it's a tough topic for sure. I think it's really difficult. And again, it's like from a fan's perspective, it's like 100% they don't owe you anything. But then it
Mm-hmm.
can be really tricky where you're just like, well, again, the fans are the backbone of so many of these people's careers. And it does feel very like, you know, playing devil's advocate, I guess, from like what they are thinking is just like, well, I essentially like, I'm supporting you. And,
Mm-hmm.
I hope to receive similar kindness back essentially. But again, what is right and what is wrong, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and I mean, I always go back to Harry Styles because his fandom is needs to be studied
Very
at a
intense, very
clinical
intense.
level. And I can say that because I live in it. Anyway, there is that whole like because when an artist is so private about their life and they don't go on social media and they are very detached from everything, one, it creates idealized expectations of like what this type of person is. It's not the actual person themselves. It's this whatever pieces are fed to like through interviews or things like that. It's not the actual person, right? And then people form an attachment to that idealized person that they've created in their head. And I can say that I've done it in myself in my entire life because I've been a fangirl since I was like 11 for different people.
Yeah,
Um,
same.
so like I'm not shaming people in thinking that way. I think it's just something that happens. And
Yeah.
then it creates that expectation where it's like, well, I know this person and I know that he wouldn't do that. And I know that he is actually this type of person. And then when we see, not with Harry, but for other people, when we see certain types of allegations or certain types of things that come up, especially in the pop punk scene, people are reluctant to accept that because they've created this idea that's fed by media, fed by pieces being put together. It creates this type of confirmation bias where you're keeping all the information that you want to hear, but ignoring all that information that refutes this idea in your brain. And
Yeah.
it leads to also that entitlement that we were talking about, that like well, I support you, therefore you should be more present on social media. Or you're not on social media, therefore you're being held captive by your management. Um, like
Yeah.
it's this whole idea that people create these expectations and think that they're smarter than they actually are, or think that they know more than they actually do. And then it leads to weird expectations. So like with Harry again, for example, he says that like no one's going to listen to my full truth. So you can make your own interpretations of my music as much as you want, but I'm never going to explain my music because it's personal to me. And you can have your own interpretations of what these lyrics mean, and that's fine for you. Um, and I think that's fair.
Yeah.
But when people start to make those interpretations of those lyrics or the way that they say things in certain interviews or things like that, and take it like as gospel and then make it the whole 100% truth, it's like no, it's your interpretation of that. Like how certain quotes get taken out of context and then inflated and then ugh. But all of these types of things they come together and they create this like good and bad of fandoms and of fangirls, and when it becomes a
Mhm.
problem they get further stigmatized. And then again what we were going back to is that like there's still some pros to it that I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on all the negatives because what my paper was is
Yeah.
actually in defense of parasocial relationships. I think they are actually really valuable to a lot of young people despite people thinking that it's like pathological or of some sort. There are a lot of benefits to it. It leads to identity formation and exploring one's identities because they're given a lot of different types of identities that they may not be aware of in their day-to-day lives. We see this a lot with like role models that are created for these types of teenagers. They see certain figures who go through certain struggles that they also go through, and they resonate with that, and that's what creates that parasocial relationship. But they feel comfort in that, right? They resonate with it, and they project themselves onto them as well. And one of the key, actually, developmental goals in developmental psychology is identity achievement, which is the idea that late teen or emerging adults, which is usually around like 18 to 22-ish, are looking for their identity and they're trying to find it. And if you're not looking for it, that's where you get into problems. So when you finally find that type of identity that resonates with you, and that could be in so many different types of identities that that culminate into one. So like your gender identity and your religious identity and your political identity and your ethnic identity, all of these things come together. And when you have those role models, it helps better facilitate that. So, for example, if you are going through a gender identity crisis, having a role model or a celebrity in that sense, or like a parasocial relationship with that can actually help mediate that and facilitate better identity exploration. And that's why I think it's so valuable because I personally am very tied to the idea of identity exploration. It's a topic that I am very fascinated about, and it leads to a lot of discussion when it comes to those who are more open-minded versus those who are very closed into what they're taught and how they should be. So having those parasocial relationships can lead to those who may not necessarily have many resources to explore themselves to actually like find parts of themselves that they may not have been familiar with at all. And we can see that in so many different ways, especially throughout the last several decades. I think there's so much to be said and so much to be explored as well. Actually all of this, what I'm saying is not just me yapping, but it's based on actual empirical scientific research. Um, Maybe I'll throw my resources in the description or any type of links. All really interesting reads. I would really recommend if you're interested in this topic at all. Funnily enough, I this is actually one of the research areas that I have been looking for grad school. So I'm very passionate about it. I've just been talking for like 10 minutes, I think. So let me pass it on to you.
But you're so good. I think that that is all super interesting. I would love, yeah, to like throw links and stuff into the description for anybody who's interested to learn more because really we're just like scratching the surface. There's so
Mhm.
much to go into on this topic and like to pivot a little bit, something that I'm gonna try to find the link to this TED Talk that I used as like a backbone for some of my research for when I did a paper on like fangirls and the topic of hysteria. And I actually leaned in a lot. It's funny. Right before we started, went back and I found my first draft for my paper from what I did this assignment because I wanted to see like what else did I talk about that maybe we didn't already have in like our outline for today's podcast. Um, but a lot of it was like going into the the background info and like, talking about different fandoms that, kind of began the idea of like what is a fangirl and like you said like that worldwide shift and like what is a fangirl and like, the first examples of fangirls that we saw. And I talked a lot about the different expectations between men and women when it comes to fandoms, and that is something that we did kind of briefly talk about before we started recording too. I think that's a really really big topic to be spoken about as well. I pulled a lot of, comparisons between, like sports fans versus, fandoms for like we're focusing a little bit more on like, within the music industry, boy bands and such. Like I focused a lot on like, One Direction and their comparison to Beatlemania because there was a very similar response from like between, One Direction, Beatlemania. I don't think we need to go into too many specifics on that. I feel like a lot of people probably experienced that or witnessed that and kind of know about that. But something that I found to be really interesting when I watched this TED Talk that was done in 2019. Um, I believe her name is Eve Blake. It was the speaker in the episode, and it was titled "Why Fangirls Are Scary," and it's such an interesting watch. I definitely recommend watching it. Um, Something that I find to be really interesting is when you think of a fangirl, like we said before, like you think of the very extreme examples, which is, the crying and the cheering and the screaming, like things like that. That's kind of what most people would envision, I think. Um, and she went into detail about the background of the word hysterical, which stems from the term hysteria, of course. And she said in the 19th century, hysteria was considered to be a legitimate
Yep.
female mental
Yep.
disorder if a woman displayed excessive emotion or difficult
Yep.
behavior.
Hmm.
And it's pretty insane when you think about that and the description of fangirls. I pulled the definition from Urban Dictionary as well for my paper as well because I wanted to see. Um, and they described fangirl at that time, this was a couple years ago, but I'm sure it hasn't changed much, as, quote, a rabid breed of human female who is obsessed with either a fictional character or an actor, obsessed to a certain degree, in parentheses, normally unhealthy.
Hmm.
And again, as a fangirl, it's just so disappointing to see this continuing to be a very just like negative interpretation where like
Yeah.
so many of the things that we've highlighted, like you said, like the identity building, the community building, the career building,
Hmm.
even within like fangirls and fandom,
Hmm.
like relationship building, finding love, finding family where you may not have that other like in other places. Like it is just so it's so underlooked and it's so unfortunate that a lot of people don't see that benefit. And when
Hmm.
you think about the difference between um fans of music between fans of like something like sports, if you go to a football game
Yeah.
and you go to a concert, you're not going to see anything that different. You're just going to see people who are really excited and really like they want, that it's the same thing. You're rooting for whoever is on the field
Yep.
or you're rooting for whoever is on the stage. You might dress up and wear a cute outfit for a concert that's like themed for a song or an album. You go to a football game, you put on a jersey, you put on face
Yep.
paint. Like it's
Yep.
another interpretation of the same feeling of feeling passion and feeling excitement. I think that that is something that is just very unfortunate that people don't see like very, similarities in the behaviors, but one is more socially acceptable than the other. And again, there are lines that need to be drawn and there are boundaries. And again, like there's really extreme cases, but the average fangirl shouldn't be put down or felt, shame.
I will say, I the one main difference between sports fans and fangirls, what is the most predominant gender in
Yes.
leaving that arena? I'm telling you, you'll notice it. It is all the same behavior. Like my dad watching basketball and me watching the Grammys, same person. Um,
Right.
you're rooting for someone. You're rooting for you have an infatuation. You have like an emotional connection to something, and it's completely normal. I mean, I live in a very hockey-centered area. Everyone goes crazy for hockey here. And I guess, parasocial relationships that people have with these hockey players are no different from the people that I see who are camping for shows. I'm sorry, but it's true. Um, Something that like
Yeah.
frustrates me is the underlying misogyny that is the basis for why fangirls get a bad reputation. And I'm not even gonna go too far into that because that's a whole other conversation, but I think the most fundamental example of that is the Beatles having such a dedicated, cr crazy is not the right word, clearly, given what I just said, um, female fan base in the 60s, in the 70s. And then it became less popular among girls and more popular among older men. And then they started getting actual praise because more men were being accepting of this. But when it was a bunch of teenage girls or young women who were infatuated with the Beatles, no one took them seriously. No one took the Beatles seriously. I'm just saying there's a trend. You can see it in so many different things. You can even see it in computer science, which is a fun fact and a tangent for, by the way. Um, Computer science was predominantly, or not predominantly, but mostly populated by like more women were getting degrees in computer science in the 80s because people thought that it wasn't a degree that was valuable. And then more men started entering that field. And then more men started viewing it as valuable. And then women were being pushed out of computer science. And now it's one of the higher paying jobs. And if you don't believe me, it's true. There are graphs. It's true. So I'm just saying trends are trends, and that is evident. And there's so much underlying that. But we don't have to get into that further. We'll talk about it later.
I know. Like even I mean, yeah, I would love to have like a whole episode talking about that because even when you think about like artists and their credibility when they have
Hmm.
a fan base that is majority female and like the
Yeah,
way that they are, accepted and the way that their music is accepted and the way that
and
their music
valued.
is taken. Yeah, yeah, if their music is taken more seriously or not. Like even just thinking about, something like the Grammys and thinking about um boy bands and bands or artists in general that have like really large female fan bases and young female fan bases at that, um, their work tends to not be taken very
Yeah,
seriously and that it's legitimate and that it doesn't contain substance. The
yeah,
fact that One Direction was never nominated for a Grammy, crime. Because
I
what?
know.
But again, it's like,
But
people like
even like, I hate to say it, but like Ariana Grande never winning one. Did she never? No, I mean she hasn't won one in a
that
long
one.
time,
Yeah,
but constantly snubbed. But my point is like, there's probably a reason why for that, and generally speaking, I mean obviously there's a million reasons for a million different things, but like generally speaking, we can't ignore these patterns, and like fundamentally, we're going all the way back to the fangirls. um, and the way that they are being taken or ridiculed, really, um, by so many media heads and so many people who have so much power. And it sucks because it's actually valuable and so important. And I hate that we're even at this conversation because it needed to be said.
I agree. And I mean, just tying everything back into like the music industry and how, I think a lot of like fangirls who are kind of following that pipeline into the music industry, a lot of the like I feel like a term that a lot of people say is like being a fangirl is a superpower. And it really is because you're tapped into the industry in a way that other people are just not.
Hmm.
You understand the significance that
Yeah.
the like an artist has to a fan and you understand that fan to artist connection and that relationship because you firsthand experienced it. Like I wouldn't be working in the music industry if it wasn't for my deep infatuation with One Direction and 5 Seconds of
Hmm.
Summer and like finding a community within that and then finding people who were also fans and then we're entering that pipeline into the music industry. Like I
Yeah.
would have never understood that that was a thing if I didn't start out with just being a lover of music and pop culture. And for the longest time, like I always believed that it was a wasted hobby. It's
Hmm.
not it's not anything legitimate. Like nothing's ever going to come from that. And I feel like a lot of people who are fangirls definitely suffer from that similar type of treatment because again, fangirls, negative stigma, all of that. I definitely think that there is, a line that needs to be drawn. Again, we're always saying like there's a line, whatever.
Yeah.
There's definitely a line that needs to be drawn in terms of like your ability to again understand the whole concept of like fandoms, the fan to artist connection, understanding what we just said throughout this whole episode that like the artist, the band, whoever is their own person and they need to be
Yeah.
separated from this idea that the media or this idea and this way that the media portrays them and understanding that they need to be taken seriously and take a step back from your own personal feelings and take a step back from your own biases and be able to be professional. That is a skill that a lot of people do not have.
Yeah.
Like if you were able to be in a room with your favorite artist working on something or whatever, if you're able to be in a room with somebody that you genuinely admire and you can keep stone cold face and you can be 100% professional and make them feel comfortable. Like I think
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's like making the artist or whoever you're working with feel super comfortable and feel super secure that the people that are around them will respect them, will keep them safe, will treat them in the way that they want to be treated. I think is something that is very important. That if you are a fangirl and you're listening to this, if you want to work in the industry, like that's like the biggest thing. And like not everybody can make that separation and not everybody wants to. And that's fine. Like if you want to live as a fangirl and you don't want to have to, think about setting all of that aside, do it. Live your truth. Like, that's one thing. But for those of you who are listening, who want to work in the music industry and are a fan, like that is something that you need to take a step back and think about like, can I set aside my own feelings? Can I be professional while I'm working? And It is really difficult. It is really difficult. I'm not going to lie. I just worked an event with one of my favorite artists ever, and I was so nervous, and I was literally like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that this is happening." But I didn't let my own fears and nerves like take away from this experience that I was so excited to have and to make them feel uncomfortable. And then the second they left the room, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah,
I let my fangirl like come out and I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe. And I was so
right.
excited. But again, I like, had that moment of separation. And then later I was like, I can't believe this happened. And then,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that I'm less able to be in that room as somebody else who isn't a fan of that person. You know what I mean? If anything, I hold a certain understanding of that artist and how their fans are going to respond to specific content or to specific things. And I know what the fan wants. And I think that that, again, is a superpower because somebody who is coming in doesn't understand anything about the artist. They might not be making totally sound decisions.
yeah,
What so many marketers and managers do is like looking at like what are the fans saying, and like if you already kind of know like what the fan voice is and what the fans are saying, what the fans want, like that is so key.
yeah.
But again, it's like taking a step back and understanding like, am I able to do this? Do I want to set this aside? Because if you like, it is a big sacrifice. Like if you're not able to, say, oh my God, I love you so much. I love your music. Like if, because in that moment you're not a fan, in that moment you're a professional. You can't just
Yeah.
take a selfie with them. Like if you're meeting them on the street, like it's a very different environment. And if you don't want to have to set that aside, then like that's your truth. Like not everybody wants to have to sacrifice those experiences. But yeah, I
I
think
think
that
like
was
the
pretty much
biggest takeaway that is so important is that these are all just people. They're all people. And like going back to your point about just needing to be professional, there is a time and place to freak out. Like you could go freak out in your car when the job's done. But you're obviously like doing something, you're doing a job and you have to be professional, and that's important not only to the artist but also to your reputation. A lot of executives are already less um are a lot more reluctant to hire people who are so emphatic about their fangirlness because they're afraid of breaking that trust or afraid that you're one like a fangirl is gonna, uh, be a threat to security even. So it's really about breaking that shield of this is a celebrity and they are everything to me and blah 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 blah. It's about a person. You are working with a person. You are treating a person a specific way. And it goes back to you being a fangirl. You are admiring a person, not this idealized fantasy that you have in your brain. It's understanding that there's so much nuance in the way that you interact with people, and not everything is black and white, especially in a topic that is so nuanced as this one, that we have to be patient, right? We can't make snap decisions and snap judgments about, oh, well, this person didn't want to take a picture with me, therefore they're an awful person. No, they have boundaries, or they just didn't want to, or they're having a bad day, it's not about you all the time. It's not about the artist all the time. There's so much going on that we all have to consider. And I think that is the biggest takeaway that I would share.
Yeah, and there's different like I don't want to harp too much on the topic with like the like artists and their boundaries and everything, but like
Yeah.
everyone's boundaries vary and like everyone again, everyone's own personal wants and needs and
Hmm.
limitations, like that is an individual experience to them. Like when the whole chapel situation was happening, so many people were comparing her and her boundaries to Louis Tomlinson from One Direction and his boundaries because he said before in interviews like I will never say no to a fan
Hmm.
who is asking for a picture because they gave me everything. And it's like that's his truth and that's how
Yeah.
he wants to approach this fan and artist connection and relationship. But even then, he was a part of one of the biggest boy bands in the world and they experienced like fandom and like yeah, fandom and fans and like all of that to like a huge extreme. And they would literally, like, if you guys watched the documentary, like they literally had to hide in a bread van to like leave their hotel because they could literally weren't safe if they just walked down the street. I've seen, Billie Eilish, she talked about that, like there was all of a sudden a day where like a switch flipped, and she used to be able to go out and like just
Yeah.
go to the grocery store or whatever, and then all of a sudden one day, like it might have been, it wasn't as early as Ocean Eyes, but it was like around that era, like a song was starting to kind of pop off. Like she went with her friend to like they went ice skating, and like in like their city. They went ice skating, and all of a sudden all of these little kids were recognizing her, and they literally cornered her on the ice rink, and she was like, I can never, like everyone was taking pictures and they were like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, oh my God, this is insane. And that's when she realized, like, oh, I can never leave my house, basically. And she had a really tough time dealing with that and thinking about, like, well, what are my boundaries and like, what do I do to feel safe? And, Chapel, like, I think she is facing a lot of negative backlash because she is one of the first, like, really, really big artists from like recent times to say these things and to say,
Yeah,
like, no, I don't feel comfortable. um I'm sure like so many people feel similar ways. They're just scared to talk about it because they don't
for
want to
sure.
alienate their fans, and they don't want them to feel like, a certain type of way. But like, again, like everybody's experience is valid and everyone's limitations and boundaries is valid. Like, just because one person feels a certain way doesn't mean that everyone is entitled to be the same way. um it's it's definitely a lot. And on the going back to the topic of like fangirls, and like there's a lot of like, oh, I would never act that way, as a from a
Mhm.
fangirl to the fangirl to music industry pipeline. Like, why would they treat me like that? Like, I would never act that way. But unfortunately, there 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 definitely have been experiences of people gaining these opportunities and wasting those opportunities and taking advantage of those
Yeah.
opportunities. And I've like had firsthand experience of people like, and like I've heard stories of people who were put into these situations and they definitely let their inner fan come out a little bit too much, and somebody above them saw it and they were like, you're not doing this anymore
Oh,
because you can't cross that line. I was working a show for one of my favorite bands, and we had like credentials that we get for every show. We had these really, really cute, like sticky credentials, and they were like all access because we had to be inside the venue before
yeah.
the show happened and everything. And sometimes, depending on the team, sometimes they let you keep it as like a keepsake. A lot of people like to keep them because it's fun to like collect and everything. Like, I like to collect my work credentials.
Yeah.
For this specific one, they took them away, and I was like, oh, like after the show, could I potentially keep it? And they said like it was a big no because with this specific artist, like they used to let people keep them, and there was a situation where an employee took advantage and they went backstage, and like
Oh,
unfortunately that ruined the experience for everyone else moving forward. And it's like, it sucks, but it does happen. And I think that's where like I can understand where the stigma still sometimes reigns a little bit true. But then again, not everybody is able to set those boundaries, and like that's fine. But like
it's not
it's
fair. Like it's
it's a
just not
tough
fair to
it's
assume
tough
everyone's like that, is really what you're trying to say.
for sure. For sure. And it's like it is tough, but if you are a fangirl and you're listening to this and like you're able to set that aside, and that you genuinely like feel passionate about the industry, and you feel passionate about that fan and artist connection, and that what your knowledge and your own experiences have so much value and you can bring that to somebody, um and in an impactful and positive way, then the work will speak for itself, and
Right.
people will understand that you are able and that you are capable.
Yeah.
um but yeah, there's so many layers to this topic. We've been talking forever. Like, even like I'm sure there's so many things that people are going to be like, but you didn't, but like what about this and what about this?
Yeah.
Like, there's so much, there's so many layers. At the end of the day, again, everyone's experiences are their own experiences. Nothing is necessarily right, nothing is necessarily wrong. Like, there's just it's a lot.
It's really just about like holding so many truths at once and being comfortable with that. And I mean, look, we could talk about this all day if we wanted to. We've got
Literally.
too many thoughts about it, God knows. But I think I'm gonna have to close this off here because we're about an hour already in. And I think we're just
Yeah.
eating at the point.
If anyone has more like if
Thought
there's like more that we need to talk about, we can do that in another
for
episode.
sure.
Or if there's anything that like opinions or anything that anyone has, like we'll be posting about this episode and everything and like the topics over on our Instagram, which is just at Jada Productions. Um go leave your input, leave your opinions and everything. I
Yeah,
know again it's a very crazy topic and it's always there's so many different things and so many different changes that are constantly happening. This whole idea of a fangirl and everything, everything's evolving, everything. There's just so much to talk about.
right.
So feel free to like drop all of your comments and everything under this episode, but also like on our social and everything. Like we want to hear about it. And if there's more to talk about, we'll keep talking about it. I know it's very intense topic.
Yeah. There is a lot more to say, but we're gonna leave it at this. So thank you so much for listening to our spiels. This has been another episode of A Little Jaded.